79% of our customers saying they haven't been able to reduce downtime. And our goal as a company, matter of fact, our mantra this year is no downtime. We realize that this isn't always a tech problem. In many cases, it's a people problem. And
Hello and welcome back to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Mayer. If you're new here, this show is super simple. I sit down with people in manufacturing. We talk about what it's like in this industry, what their story has been, what the culture feels like, what people have built and what they're proud of, what legacies they want to leave behind, and really why they stay. If you've been on the journey with me before, thanks for coming back. If you're new here again, or you've been here before, please take 2 minutes, go into whatever platform you're listening to this on, and rate and review the show. It's not for my ego. It's not for my guest's ego. It's to help other people find the show, because there's some funky algorithm that every time you rate and review the show, rockets us up the charts and more people are able to find us. So today's episode, I'm talking with Chris Hutson. Chris, welcome to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. How are you doing today, man?
Excellent. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for being here. We met IMTS 2024 on the show floor. I was doing booth interviews, and I interviewed Nick Haas from MaintainX, and you were there in the booth with him, and we got to chatting, and you're just a good dude, and the only requirement I have to be on this show is don't be an asshole, and so you fit that bill well, and so here we are today with you on the show. I appreciate you being here.
Excellent. Thanks. I hope I can cover those prerequisites well.
Oh man, you're here, you're smiling. That's already a win in my book. So Chris, let's get into the icebreakers. I don't even know if I prepped you for these, so they're going to be a lot of fun. I know I didn't in our conversation before I hit the record button here. So the first one is, if your life were a movie, what genre would it be? Who plays you? And then what's the opening scene?
Awesome. And no, we did not prep for these. So
cool.
I think the genre would be a mystery, right?
Okay.
And I'm going to go back a little bit when you talk about, and not trying to date myself, but you talk about characters that have sort of immediate recognition and are pretty diverse. I'm going to go with Jack Nicholson. Okay.
Right, man.
Like me, he's a little scary and can be funny. And man, the first scene, I think the first scene is always going to be trying to set up this saga. And it doesn't have to be a long running sequel that Jack did many of, but it probably is setting up, just like in the real world, what's a compelling case that attracts people to want to participate and see it to the end.
Awesome. I love that. I think in all the episodes that I've been asking this question, I think you might be the first mystery man. So well done. That's why you got the reaction from me that you did, because I'm not used to hearing mystery. So that's awesome. Jack is wonderful. I mean, what a range that guy has as far as like characters he can play. So that's all. Chris, second icebreaker, equally as important, maybe less like laughing funny. It's a manufacturing culture podcast. We have to talk about culture. So what is culture to you? What is your definition of culture? Because there's a dictionary definition. I've asked this question maybe 100 times at this point, and out of 100 people, I think I've gotten like 96 different answers. So I just love hearing what people's definition of culture is.
Yeah, I think there are many different factors, right, in terms of culture. But to me, it's really more around how companies and their teams are aligned around shared values, goals, and to me, the most important behaviors. And so we can dive a little deeper into that. To me, the interaction and the behaviors tell me much more around that culture and the keys to success.
Awesome. So, I'm a firm believer that the root of all of the cultural alignment, right, starts with values. I love that you added behaviors in there. Talk to us a little bit about behaviors. How do you behave in a way that builds culture?
That's interesting. Seen enough of some of your podcasts, Jim, to when we talk about behaviors, and this is intrinsic not just in the business world, but in your personal world. And you and I are aligned on a couple of things. One of them is being a coach. A coach with it is not just in the traditional sense of wins and losses. In today's world, it gets really complex, right, around that and the culture behind wins and losses. But I think it's more around your ability to attract, train, develop, and build teams that can be successful. And I think to me, coaching has within it many of the typical, when you think about culture, there's still going to be the Venn diagram that overlaps around people, process, and technology. And if you think about one thing that can really sway the people side of that is the ability for someone to coach that team. And we talk more about, the performance side of teams because I have spent, fortunately, my career with organizations that invested in not only leadership training from a whole 360 leadership perspective around people, providing their confidential input around your leadership styles, but then more importantly, tying those leadership styles to the strategic initiatives of the business and people always being at the forefront of that. So
When our employees don't feel like they're being developed, when they don't feel like there's a career pathway for them, that's when that opens a door for them to be open to a change and going somewhere else, right? It's never the 50 cents or a dollar more an hour that gets somebody to leave a plant or a factory or a shop. What led up to being open to taking an offer or even a phone call for that conversation to start, right? Do you think there's any validity in that?
absolutely, right. The data really supports that. In our industry, the data recently, MaintainX annually does a state of industrial maintenance in manufacturing. And it's interesting to see that 79% of those surveyed, it's a large survey body that you would appreciate of our 14,000 customers.
Amazing.
That's, yeah, 79% of teams really have not reduced unplanned downtime even in lieu of all the advances in technology. And so when you think about that, it's what you're inferring. It's not a tech story necessarily. There's a lot of advances, and I'm sure we'll talk about AI and automation, but the advances don't always equal the people side. And so the 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 reliability improvements really stem a lot from the ability to train, to coach, and to create this operational excellence model. So, yeah, when you talk about the analogy with your son, it's, I'm sure there was some alignment of the team, but it sounds like on a three legged stool, maybe where they fell short was the ability to develop or improve both as an individual and maybe even as a team if that's connected. And then, I go back to, and I learned this early on in sports and even coaching youth sports, and it also translates to business is the ability to have fun, to be motivated, to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to enjoy it. You've got to. So let's we will talk about AI. We will talk about tech. We will talk about MaintainX and all the things that you're doing now. But let's go back in time a little bit to why you got into this field. Like your career spans 30 years ish at this point from the 90s. Talk to us. What led you into this field? Because I mean, I've met very few people who have a linear path into this industry.
Right. And I think mine's no different from that, right? I just happened to be raised in an environment with family members, including my father, that were in engineering. I was fortunate that early on he worked for some of the leading aerospace engineering and then later federal government, where I had a chance to go to bases and fly in helicopters and learn a lot about aeronautics. But I started out in chemical engineering, but early on, uh, I've always had the ability to and interest to build things, right? So whether that was working on lawnmower motors when I was a kid, or just always, again, my father started out as an aeronautical mechanic before he became a aeronautical engineer. So I think teaching people the ability to problem solve, right, in engineering schools is certainly one of the focus. But I think just I do this, with our kids and my grandchildren now, and that's the ability to problem solve by building something. I just recall performance based interviews for like field service engineers. And this seems really unusual. It's like I couldn't bring one of our CNC machines or a palletizer or a robot into a conference room or a training room and say, I've there's some faults here. We did some of that in simulation, but I would do something simple like a copier, something around an office machine, which would give you a digital error code. But more importantly, I would see their ability to problem solve and troubleshoot and repair, and then to sort of explain the process they used, the time it took, what other tools or process information would have been helpful to help them reduce the mean time to repair, if you will. So I think just early on, my ability to and interest in building things led me into industrial engineering. And so that's where I started out as a manufacturing engineer, went into maintenance management, and spent my 30 years really in three main areas: manufacturing operations and maintenance reliability through manufacturing leadership, and then engineering. I also spent a half my career in a life cycle support team with an engineering group doing upgrades and retrofits and technical support on equipment in the field. And yeah, that third one was the customer facing that I always liked, around lifecycle support. It's interesting to be on the pre-sale side, but the proof in the pudding a lot of times is the ability to support your customers, understand their
Mm-hmm.
needs, once equipment's in their operation, and how you really support their ROI.
Awesome. So when you were a leader within these companies, right? Because you worked your way up from being a technician, individual contributor, as it were, into a leadership role. Do you feel like you were ready for your first leadership role?
I think so because, again, you go back to communicating and personnel development. I had a vice president who early on sort of brought me in like a management training program. But I was asked for many companies in say manufacturing. There's several paths. One can be a technical path, and I think companies that do that well bring people all the way up to principal engineers and head of engineering. And then there's more management paths. And so I actually ended up in maintenance management. I tell this story because I didn't see anywhere like, hey, I want to be a maintenance manager supporting three shift, multiple facilities, calls all night and weekends, and trying to be an expert on thousands of assets and production operations. But as an industrial engineer specifying CapEx projects, I became sort of the expert on not only the scope of work and the project charter of that automation, let's say, but also the teams, right? Being able to train and implement a successful CapEx project to the point where people just said, "Hey, you're sort of the expert," and we lose some of the efficiencies of this automation when you're no longer involved, even though there was training. So it was like, hey, why don't you just run our maintenance teams too? Because they're the ones that are really doing a lot of the ongoing support of these projects. So I was prepared, but I wasn't prepared for some of those kinds of roles.
I love that. And so, given what you know now about keeping maintenance up to date, leadership. What do you wish that your vendors knew then that you now know?
Yeah, and I think it's a bi-directional, right? I learned early on in stepping into that as a young engineer into a maintenance manager role with very experienced technicians and reliability engineers and quality engineers in these environments. One of them being a union environment, so there's a lot of, say, rules of engagement. I learned early on to rely heavy on vendors as subject matter experts and to collaborate and involve them in the solution and the ongoing performance of those systems and equipment. The other thing I think I learned is, maintenance can be sort of put in a box where it's like a necessary evil, particularly maybe some folks in finance or, levels of a company that aren't, maintenance isn't necessarily a production cost center. So there are a lot of things that we could talk about today and that are available to support where maintenance and reliability now, particularly in the world of automation, data, AI, can really be a competitive advantage and support more than anyone the outcome of those production.
So,
So
who's of all the people you've led over the course of your career, is there one or two people that has stuck in your head from your days on the floor that you're like, man, I learned a huge valuable lesson from this person? And it could be a mentor or somebody that was working directly under you. But is there one or two people that you remember fondly?
yeah, I think there's many folks along the way. Again, I had the privilege of working in some organizations that were the market leader in high speed material handling and automation systems, very complex uh, operations, and so some tremendous engineering leaders. But it's interesting, as we talk about culture, one of the ones that comes to mind that I never would have predicted early on. It was my first year at a newer company after spending over 25 years at one, and I was in a role of director of manufacturing and tilting up a whole new life cycle services organization for this company, and they were in 60 countries. The president that I was president of the division I was reporting to, professional engineer, very astute. Learned a lot of engineering tools from him. But this is a simple one that talks about people development and just that behavior based to connect and understand the key resource in your company, the people. We would have the first annual, say, holiday party. And I'm trying to learn, maybe there's a couple hundred folks in my org, right? That I'm trying to just learn their name and, some aspects of them that I can refer to and personalize. And this guy taught me as we're at this holiday party, we're going up to, it's our employees and their significant other. He knows every over, he's not sitting at the head table. He's mingling in this very large room with over 300 people. And literally over 50 times I'm with him and he knows not only your name, Jim, but your wife's or spouse, significant other's name, and he's telling stories about, say, their children, something very personal, specific. He would use the opportunity to praise, "Hey, Jim, I thanks for getting this project home under budget and on time." But then he would ask something like, "Hey, I know your daughter Mary. She's going to be a free agent this month, right? She's graduating. What are her interests?" And after doing this like over 50 times, the next day I went into his office. I said, hey, he's like, I'm on a call. I said, okay, I just need to interrupt you for 1 second. How did you know at least 50 people, not only just the employee, his spouse, and something personal story about them? And he hands me a book, and it's like a 2-inch binder, which I later took with me. It had that he studied everything about every family, just a key excerpt of, something he could personalize. And he memorized every
Wow.
significant other and something significant about them. So when you talk about personalization and motivating people, I think that those people went home and I'm sure there are a lot of family discussions around, wow, how cool it is that the president of your division knows not only you, but knows your
Yeah.
spouse, knows your children and what's important to you.
Yeah, and I've been on the other end of that. My very first consulting client, on the first day of our engagement, I walked in to their facility and the owner walked me around and he knew less than like 70% of his team's first names. Not even what their last name, who their spouse was, what they're interested in. He just didn't know their names. And I look back on that and no wonder they were having a cultural crisis at the moment, because the owner didn't even know who was on his floor. And it's a 100-person company. It's not like it's a whole lot of people there, but he just didn't know. So that's a really cool story out of you. I like that a lot. So you've talked about, Chris, that alignment of people and processes and technology, not just today on the show, but on your LinkedIn and publicly as well. When that alignment breaks down, what's the actual problem that causes the breakdown of that alignment?
Well, that's good. I think as you're doing root cause corrective action, whether it gets into just a upper level 5 whys, but there's always sort of the DMAIC model. Let's try to define and measure. And the technical and the process side of that, right, from an engineering and process capability, is much easier to sort of measure and improve. I think the reason that I think it's imperative for today's leaders to really understand what 360 leadership is and go all the way back to the dimensional leadership model and where do they fit in the quadrant, right? Are they a Q4 leader? Do they understand what that even means? But the people side of that, right? When we talk about, like we were discussing, around 79% of our customers saying they haven't been able to reduce downtime. And our goal as a company, matter of fact, our mantra this year is no downtime. We realize that this isn't always a tech problem. In many cases, it's a people problem. I'll give you, just recently being at a show, talk just our customers around what are some of the pain points that they have, and very few of them actually start talking about the technology platform, right? So this isn't much as a technology platform problem as it is a people issue. And one of the things that there's our customers are saying, and you hear in the space, is the silver tsunami, right? Veterans are retiring, and it's the knowledge transfer. How are we, forget about the agentic models that we're building, how are we capturing subject matter expertise of this group of people retiring in numbers to the point where 31% of our company surveys say knowledge transfer and training is one of their top problems. And a quote I had from, again, a customer at a recent show was, one of the things that keeps him up at night is the tribal knowledge leaving in his network. That was Mike Truitt at Michaels, and Mike is a fantastic leader. He came from military, and he really spends a lot of time on the people side of the business. And so to hear that from him as he's operating all these distribution centers with hundreds of people, that's a compelling statement.
Awesome. And so why MaintainX? Why did you join MaintainX?
That's a great question. So I think when I started looking at the last time to go find a more modern, technician friendly, mobile first platform that could integrate across our tech stack to our ERP, to our SCADA, to our MES system, I found MaintainX. And so I was one of their first customers, and 6 years ago, and used the platform, implemented it globally across not only manufacturing sites, but also pre-digitizing complex systems for customers, where all the digital equipment, almost like a digital twin light, I'll call it, existed and was integratable quickly to their ecosystem. Yeah, it was easy after being a customer for 4 or 5 years to join the MaintainX team because they really do walk the walk and showed me how customer centric they were. And I think they just are unique in the space. And I think their rate of growth and the positioning of where they are expresses that.
I love that. And I've found that MaintainX is a great platform. I've never used it myself, but just the people that I have met that have used it are very happy with it. And I like Nick a lot. I like you a lot, but everybody I've ever met from the MaintainX ecosystem on the customer and employee side is very upbeat. They're very happy and they show a lot of pride in just being able to work for MaintainX. So I think that's really awesome. Chris, what are you proud of from your career? What when you look back on the career you've had so far, and you're still in media res, you're not retiring tomorrow. So when you look at your career, what makes you proud?
Wow. There's several things, but again, I think there's probably three top things that, at the bottom of that is the ability to, there's a trophy here in my office that is a aftermarket lifecycle team that we built had a 25% CAGR. So for 6 years in a row, we
Dang.
achieved 25% growth 6 years in a row, and turned a 50-person lifecycle organization into literally almost a 500 person team that was doing over 250 million a year. Right. So those are like, hey, these are P&L kind of stories. And I think maybe at two, there's project level stories, complicated automation systems that you were fortunate to either lead as a project lead or even as a cross-functional team be a part of. And that could be software too, right? We all have those stories of putting up a new ERP system and the impact it made across our enterprise. But I think for me, kind of again, reverse engineering this, that probably the top thing to me, and it can seem corny, but it goes back to our affinity, you and I and others, for developing people and coaching. I can say to this day that people that I had the benefit of having on a team, that over 25 of them are directors or above now and very leading organizations in the space. And so I learned early on from a really good mentor, not to digress here, but some organizations, I don't know if you've ever spent time learning about the GE vitality curve, right? General Electric and the Jack Welch era had this curve where it was on around the annual performance time, and I had to use parts of this at my last company because they had strong teams, but whenever they would assess a team, everybody was a top performer, right? Everybody should get the top merit increase. Everybody participated in our key pillars of safety, delivery, cost, and I knew that wasn't the case. And so it's the ability, I think, to attract, recruit, and develop top performers, and to, as a leader, also a great book I read, just, I don't know, 10 years ago was Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. And that was compelling to me because as a leader, when you attract, retain, develop strong top performers, you kind of want to hold on to them, right? You don't want them to become free agents. And we all know that that is probably one of the first things they're going to have those people leave your teams because they will, you know, one of the last acronym in coach H is honesty, right? And so if you can't be honest and committed to developing people and promoting them for either not only best in their interest or best for the organization, then you're a disservice to, I think, to yourself and your organization. There's one story here, and this was kind of right before I came to MaintainX. I had a person I brought over two companies with me, right? That was a great engineer, had become a really good project manager, a program manager over a whole like 50 locations for a key account. And that company loved him. But he came in my office one day, shut the door, and said, "Hey, Chris." And he was hemming and hawing. I'm like, "Hey, what's going on? Everything okay at home?" And he's like, I'm really sorry. I'm letting you down, but I have, and I'm like, "Hey, man, what? You have an opportunity? So he explained this to me, and I was just like, this is a tremendous opportunity for you to go be a general manager and start your own location. Man, what a way to put your endorsement on something that you're so passionate about. Anyway,
That's
those are
awesome.
stories that I think as leaders, we should celebrate.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a firm believer myself that our job as a leader is to make new leaders, right? And because I've worked for leaders who wanted to keep me lower on the ranks, right? Did not want to see me succeed. And so I felt that. And so every person I've ever had on a team of mine, if they want my job or they want a job above my job, I will help them get there regardless at the cost to myself. And I think that that's how we all need to lead. Chris, I'm going to wrap up here with a final question for you. What haven't I asked you that you want to share with the audience?
I think it really elaborates more, based on your audience and what we talked about today. And that is, sort of like 360 leadership, the ability to have an accurate gap assessment of your organizations with the eye around operational excellence, right? And so we talked a bit about, this data that, let's say in the maintenance world, where a key initiative and KPI is to reduce downtime, right? And we just talked about the gap that's there, where 65% say their assets are being, proactively maintained through conditional monitoring and PMs, but really the reality, the gap is that 40% of the technicians say their time is spent firefighting. So I think it's more around to arm people with those type of gap assessments, and then more importantly, that they should use the community and our space to surround themselves. Like I mentioned, don't push your vendors away, or don't push technology or processes away. Help your people by developing better tools so that you can help to close that gap. And there's a great quote by Ben Horowitz that says, "You can't buy your way out of a culture gap." Right. So much of this is not a technology platform caused. It's more of the culture gap.
I love it. Chris, thank you so much for coming on, chatting with me today. This was a really fun, really insightful conversation. I love having conversations where we go a little bit deeper than surface level, right? We didn't just talk about the same old, same old. We went a little bit deeper into the root causes and the issues that the industry is facing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being open and honest and vulnerable and all the things.
I appreciate you having me and everything, Jim, that you're doing and the manufacturing connectors doing as an advocate in the space.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Chris Hutson. If this conversation resonated with you in any way, shape, or form, please share it with people. Send it to your coworkers, send it to your wife or spouse, send it to your grandma. I don't really care. She'd probably love Chris and I. Send it to people who aren't sure what to do next in their career. We all know people who are mid-career right now who don't really know what they want to do with themselves, and manufacturing can be that landing spot for them. So share the episode, write a review, leave a rating. All of that helps more people find the show. Thanks for being on this journey with me. Until next time, keep making things. Have a great day.